Maxwell Reed had everything money could buy, a tech empire valued at billions, homes across 3 continents, and a life curated to perfection. Yet emptiness followed him like a shadow. On that rainy Tuesday morning, he ducked into Luminous Grounds, a corner cafe he'd passed 100 times, but never entered. Behind the counter stood Evelyn, her unseeing eyes somehow more perceptive than any he'd encountered. When she handed him his latte, their fingers brushed, and the world stopped. A jolt of something primal and forgotten surged through him, leaving him paralyzed, breathless. For the first time in decades, his carefully constructed walls crumbled. What power did this blind barista possess that could render one of the world's most powerful men completely defenseless? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm chimed at precisely 4:30 a.m. Though Maxwell Reed had already been awake for 17 minutes, sleep had become an inefficiency he tolerated rather than enjoyed. He rose from his California king bed, the cityscape of Manhattan glittering 78 floors below, through floor-to-ceiling windows that cost more than most homes. "Good morning, Mr. Reed," the smart home system announced. "The temperature is 43 degrees. Markets in Asia are closing up 2.1%. Your first meeting is at 7:30. Maxwell didn't respond. The system didn't require acknowledgement. It existed to serve, not converse. In his private gym, he completed his daily 90-minute routine with mechanical precision, each movement calculated, each breath measured. His personal trainer had designed the regimen years ago, but Maxwell had long since dismissed him. He preferred solitude. At his kitchen island, Italian marble specially quarried from a mountain he now owned, he sipped a protein shake while scanning quarterly reports on his tablet. Reed Technologies had surpassed projections again. The board would be pleased. Maxwell felt nothing. The Reed Tower stood as a monument to his success, 83 floors of gleaming glass and brushed steel, its distinctive curved apex visible from anywhere in the city. As his private elevator ascended, Maxwell adjusted his platinum watch, a rare timepiece that cost 7 figures. He had 12 identical suits, one for each day of the week, with 5 in rotation at the cleaners. Today was Tuesday, dark gray with subtle pinstripes. "Good morning, Mr. Reed," his executive assistant said as he stepped onto the executive floor. She'd worked for him for 7 years. Though they'd never discussed anything personal, he couldn't recall if she had children. "The board is waiting. In the Apex room," she continued, matching his stride. "Mr. Harrington has concerns about the Kyoto expansion." "Harrington always has concerns," Maxwell replied, his voice flat. "That's why he'll never run a company." In the boardroom, 12 faces turned toward him. Once, these meetings had thrilled him. The power, the strategy, the conquest. Now they were merely items on his calendar. "The Austin factory is behind schedule," operations announced. "They're citing supply chain issues." "Fire the project manager," Maxwell said without looking up from his notes. "Replace the suppliers. We open as scheduled." "That's 3,000 jobs at risk if we switch suppliers," someone noted. Maxwell finally looked up. "Are we running a charity or a business?" No one challenged him. They never did anymore. Later, as rain pelted against the windows of his office, Maxwell reviewed acquisition targets. A promising neural interface startup had rejected his initial offer. He doubled it, knowing they couldn't refuse. Another victory. Without satisfaction, his physician had a term for what he experienced: emotional blunting. A common response to chronic stress and overwork, she'd explained during his last executive physical. "Your brain is protecting itself." She'd suggested therapy. Maxwell had changed physicians. The rain intensified as he left the tower. His driver was waiting, but Maxwell dismissed him with a wave. A rare impulse. He wanted to walk despite the weather. Perhaps the cold would make him feel something. Water dripped from his bespoke umbrella as he strode through crowded streets. People hurried past, hunched against the rain, unaware of the billionaire in their midst. His recent engagement had ended 6 months ago, though the press hadn't discovered that yet. Veronica had accused him of being emotionally unavailable. She wasn't wrong. The unexpected downpour drove him from his usual route. Turning down an unfamiliar street, he noticed a small cafe tucked between a bookshop and a vintage record store. "Luminous Grounds," read the hand-painted sign. Something about the warm light spilling onto the wet sidewalk made him pause. Maxwell checked his watch, a 7-minute deviation from his schedule. Acceptable. He needed coffee anyway. The door chimed softly as he entered, bringing with it the aroma of freshly ground beans and something else, something unexpectedly human. For the first time that day, Maxwell Reed felt a flicker of curiosity. Evelyn Taylor woke before her alarm, as she did most mornings. Darkness greeted her, but this was nothing new. It had been her constant companion for 20 years. The sounds and scents of early morning told her all she needed to know. A gentle rain against her windows, the distant rumble of delivery trucks, and the faint aroma of yesterday's coffee lingering in her small apartment above Luminous Grounds. Her fingers found the worn leather cover of her Braille journal on the nightstand. Every morning began with the same ritual, documenting dreams, impressions, and the occasional glimpses she received from yesterday's encounters. She ran her fingertips over the raised dots of her last entry. Man in blue coat, profound grief beneath cheerful exterior. Lost wife recently, seeking connection. But afraid, recommended chamomile with honey. Evelyn's gift had manifested shortly after she lost her sight at 12. The doctors called it a neurological anomaly, heightened sensory compensation, but they couldn't explain how she perceived emotions and unspoken truths through physical contact. After years of being studied, then exploited by those who discovered her ability, she'd retreated to create her own sanctuary. In the bathroom, she moved with practiced precision. No wasted motions, no fumbling. Her apartment was arranged specifically for her needs, everything in its place, nothing ever moved. Independence wasn't just a preference, it was her armor. Downstairs, the cafe welcomed her with familiar creaks and echoes. Evelyn unlocked the back entrance at precisely 5:15 a.m. Her assistant manager, Gabriel, wouldn't arrive for another hour, giving her precious time alone with her space. "Good morning, old friend," she murmured to the empty cafe. Her fingers trailed along countertops and equipment, checking that everything remained in its proper place. The ancient espresso machine hummed to life under her touch, its temperamental nature soothed by her patience. By 6, the first batch of pastries warmed the air with cinnamon and butter. Evelyn had hired local bakers who delivered fresh goods daily, people she'd connected with through community outreach programs, many with their own stories of overcoming obstacles. The cafe had become more than a business. It was the heart of a small but devoted community. People came as much for Evelyn's quiet insights as they did for her expertly brewed coffee. She never advertised her ability, but regulars knew there was something special about the blind woman, who seemed to understand what they needed before they spoke it. "Morning, Evelyn," called Mrs. Abernathy, the first customer every day for 5 years. "Raining cats and dogs out there." "Earl Grey with lemon today, I think," Evelyn replied, already reaching for the tea. "Your arthritis is bothering you." The older woman chuckled. "Don't need eyes to see right through me, do you?" By mid-morning, Luminous Grounds pulsed with quiet energy. Gabriel handled the register while Evelyn worked the drinks, her fingers detecting subtle differences in texture and temperature that machines couldn't match. The regulars knew not to rearrange furniture or leave things in unexpected places. They protected this haven as much as she did. During a brief lull, Evelyn retreated to the small office to review her notes for tomorrow's music therapy session with visually impaired children at the community center. Teaching piano had become her second passion. The children approached music without visual distractions, hearing nuances others missed. As she traced the Braille music sheets, a strange sensation prickled at the edges of her awareness. Someone new would enter her world today, someone carrying an unusual burden. Evelyn had learned to trust these premonitions. She returned to the counter and prepared a special tea blend she reserved for those in emotional distress. The herbs were steeping when the front door chimed, admitting a gust of rain-scented air and footsteps unlike any regular customers. Purposeful, measured, expensive shoes on her worn wooden floors. Without turning, Evelyn knew this visitor would change everything. She smiled to herself and reached for her finest coffee beans. The cafe was smaller than Maxwell expected, intimate, almost stubbornly so in an era of expansive chain stores. Edison bulbs cast warm pools of light over mismatched furniture. No digital menus, no order-ahead app integration, no efficiency whatsoever. His tech-optimized mind calculated a dozen improvements before he'd taken 3 steps inside. Customers occupied most tables, reading physical books, engaged in actual conversations, or simply staring out at the rain. No one looked up at his entrance. No one recognized the man whose technology likely powered the devices in their pockets. Maxwell approached the counter, where a slender woman with chestnut hair worked with fluid movements. She hadn't turned toward him, yet something in her posture suggested awareness of his presence. "Welcome to Luminous Grounds," she said, still facing the espresso machine. "First visit?" "Yes," Maxwell replied, slightly disconcerted. "How did you—" "Your footsteps." She turned, revealing striking features and eyes that didn't quite focus on him. Unfamiliar patterns, expensive shoes on wet pavement. She smiled. "Plus, regulars know to close the door quickly when it's raining." Maxwell studied her more carefully. Her clouded blue eyes confirmed what her fluid movements had expertly disguised. She was blind. Yet she operated complex equipment with graceful precision. "What can I make for you?" she asked, her fingers lightly touching the counter's edge. "Double espresso," Maxwell said automatically, then reconsidered. "No, whatever you recommend." This wasn't like him, relinquishing control, even over something as insignificant as coffee. Yet something about this place, this woman, made him curious. She tilted her head slightly. "Not an espresso day. I think a cardamom latte with house-made almond milk." Maxwell checked his watch impatiently. "Fine." Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, grinding beans, tamping grounds, steaming milk, no wasted motion, no hesitation. Maxwell found himself strangely captivated by the performance. "You're in a hurry," she observed, "but also avoiding something." "Interesting. Combination. Do you analyze all your customers?" Maxwell asked, his tone sharper than intended. She laughed softly. "Only the interesting ones?" The woman selected a handcrafted ceramic mug from a shelf, deep blue with subtle texture patterns around the rim. Maxwell noticed her fingertips lingering on these ridges, reading them like a secret language. "I'm Evelyn, by the way," she said, pouring the steamed milk into the espresso with surprising artistry. "Maxwell," he replied, deliberately omitting his surname. "Just Maxwell. Like Madonna." "Or Cher." Amusement colored her voice as she slid the finished drink across the counter. "That'll be $5, just Maxwell." He extended his credit card rather than using contactless payment, an uncharacteristic choice. Her fingers brushed his as she took the card, and the world stopped. For Evelyn, the contact was electric, a lightning strike of sensation unlike any she'd experienced. Beneath Maxwell's carefully constructed exterior surged oceans of suppressed emotion. Loneliness so profound, it had calcified into numbness, ambition twisted into purpose, brilliant light dimmed by decades of isolation. His essence rushed through her with such intensity that she nearly gasped. For Maxwell, time suspended. A warmth spread from his fingertips through his hand, up his arm, and into his chest, melting something frozen for so long he'd forgotten its existence. Memories cascaded unbidden, his mother's laughter, his first invention at 11, exhilaration at early success, the gradual hardening of his heart with each achievement. Emotions he'd buried beneath spreadsheets and acquisitions surfaced with breathtaking force. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. His carefully constructed walls crumbled like ancient plaster. Evelyn gently withdrew her hand, her expression shifting from surprise to compassion. "Your latte is getting cold," she said softly, returning his card. Maxwell remained frozen, staring at this woman who had somehow reached into his chest and awakened something he'd thought long dead. "Breathe," she advised. He did, a shuddering inhale that felt like his first in years. "What?" he began, his voice unfamiliar to his own ears. "What just happened?" Evelyn smiled enigmatically. "You should drink your coffee, Maxwell, then perhaps come back tomorrow when you're ready to talk about it." His phone buzzed, 14 notifications during their brief exchange. Maxwell glanced at the screen, then back at Evelyn. Without another word, he grabbed the mug, left twice the amount due on the counter, and fled into the rain. The ceramic mug remained on his desk all day, empty but untouched, like an artifact from another world. Maxwell sat motionless in the back of his town car, rain streaking the tinted windows as Manhattan blurred past. His corporate phone buzzed incessantly, each notification registering like distant static rather than the urgent summons they represented. For the first time in memory, the device's demands seemed trivial, almost amusing in their desperate insistence. "Sir?" His driver's voice broke through his reverie. "We've arrived." Maxwell blinked, surprised to find they'd reached the biotech facility where his morning acquisitions meeting awaited. He couldn't recall giving the driver instructions. In the elevator, he caught his reflection. Impeccable suit, perfect Windsor knot, not a hair out of place. Yet something in his eyes looked different, unsettled. "There he is." Lawrence Keller, head of acquisitions, approached as Maxwell entered the conference room. "We were about to send a search party." Maxwell checked his watch. 9 minutes late. Unprecedented. "Let's begin," he said, taking his seat at the head of the table as the presentation unfolded, detailing the neural interface company's patents, talent pool, and growth projections. Maxwell found his attention repeatedly drifting to the sensation that had paralyzed him in the cafe, the warmth that had radiated through his chest, the memories that had surfaced without permission. "Mr. Reed?" Maxwell looked up to find all eyes on him. "Yes? Your thoughts on the revised offer?" Keller asked, barely concealing his confusion at Maxwell's uncharacteristic detachment. "Double it," Maxwell said automatically. "Double?" Keller exchanged glances. "With the CFO, we've already increased by 30%. Our analysis suggests—" "I didn't ask for analysis," Maxwell interrupted. "I want that company." The room fell silent. No one questioned Maxwell Reed's decisions twice. Throughout the day, similar scenes repeated. During the quarterly strategy review, he approved a sustainability initiative he'd previously dismissed as sentimental waste. In the product development meeting, he stared at design mock-ups without seeing them, his mind replaying the moment of contact with the blind barista's fingertips. His executive assistant, Claire, finally addressed the elephant in the room. "Are you feeling all right, Mr. Reed?" she asked, placing a stack of contracts on his desk. "You seem distracted." Maxwell considered the question. Was he all right? Something fundamental had shifted, as if someone had recalibrated his internal settings without permission. "I'm fine," he replied, "just processing some new information." After she left, Maxwell opened his laptop and began an uncharacteristic search. Synesthesia, tactile hallucinations, stress-induced sensory phenomena, minor stroke symptoms. Each search yielded clinical explanations that failed to capture what he'd experienced. At 2:17 a.m., in his penthouse office overlooking the sleeping city, Maxwell found himself scrolling through obscure research papers on heightened sensory perception in the visually impaired. One article mentioned cases of blind individuals developing extraordinary compensatory abilities, some documented, others anecdotal. A paragraph caught his attention. Subject E.T. demonstrated remarkable empathic accuracy through tactile contact, correctly identifying emotional states and biographical details without prior knowledge. Further study was discontinued at subject's request. Maxwell stared at the initials. E.T. Evelyn. What was her last name? He hadn't asked. He closed the laptop and moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Rain still fell, gentler now, painting the city in reflective sheen. In 20 years of living in this penthouse, he'd rarely taken time to appreciate the view. That night, Maxwell dreamed for the first time in years. Not the usual stress dreams of falling or being unprepared, but vivid sequences of light and sensation. In one fragment, he stood in a sun-drenched field, laughing with uninhibited joy. In another, he played piano for an audience whose faces he couldn't see. He woke with tears on his cheeks, an alien sensation that both disturbed and fascinated him. "Cancel my morning," he told Claire when she called with his daily brief. Another unprecedented request. "The Tokyo investors," she began. "Reschedule," he said firmly. Something's come up. Something had indeed. A curiosity he couldn't suppress, a question he couldn't answer with algorithms or acquisitions. What exactly had happened when he touched Evelyn's hand, and why couldn't he stop thinking about it? Maxwell arrived at luminous grounds, dressed in deliberate anonymity. Charcoal cashmere sweater, dark jeans, and glasses he rarely wore in public. The tech mogul who appeared on magazine covers and financial news segments had temporarily vanished, replaced by a man who might blend into any upscale cafe. The morning rush had subsided, leaving the space half full with patrons typing on laptops or conversing in hushed tones. Maxwell scanned the room and spotted an antique chess set in the corner, marble pieces arranged mid-game on a worn wooden board. He selected a table with clear sightlines to the counter, where Evelyn worked alongside a bearded young man in a colourful apron. "Welcome back," she called without turning, as if she'd been expecting him. Maxwell froze halfway to his seat. "How did you—" "Your cologne," she replied, smiling slightly. "Distinctive. Custom-made, I'm guessing?" He sat down, unsettled by her perception. "Yes, from a perfumer in Florence." "Gabriel will take your order when you're ready," she said, returning. Her attention to the espresso machine. The bearded barista approached, recognition dawning in his eyes. "What can I get you, sir?" he asked, clearly struggling to maintain professional composure in the presence of Maxwell Reed. "Whatever she recommends," Maxwell replied, nodding toward Evelyn. Gabriel returned to the counter and whispered something to Evelyn, who nodded without surprise. Minutes later, she personally delivered a steaming mug to Maxwell's table, setting it down with careful precision. "Maple cortado, with a hint of cardamom," she explained. "Different from yesterday. You seem less armored today." Maxwell noticed. She deliberately avoided making contact with his hand. "Do you always analyze your customers' emotional states to determine their coffee preferences?" "Only the ones who come back after running away," she replied, amusement in her voice. "Mind if I join you? Gabriel can handle things for a few minutes." Without waiting for his answer, she pulled out the chair opposite him and sat down. Up close, Maxwell studied her more carefully than he had during their brief encounter. Her eyes, though unseeing, held remarkable expressiveness, intelligence and warmth radiating from their clouded blue depths. Her movements remained precise, and graceful hands coming to rest comfortably on the table. "You have questions," she stated. "Several," Maxwell admitted, "starting with what happened yesterday when we touched," she finished. "Yes, that was unexpected." "Unexpected. How?" Evelyn tilted her head slightly. I sometimes get impressions from people through physical contact. With you, it was more like opening a floodgate. Two elderly women at a nearby table leaned forward, clearly eavesdropping. Maxwell lowered his voice. What kind of impressions? Emotions. Mostly. Sometimes memories or sensations. She smiled apologetically. I'm not a mind reader, if that's what you're worried about. Your corporate secrets are safe. I'm not concerned about corporate espionage, Maxwell said, though in truth, the possibility had crossed his mind. I'm trying to understand a physiological response that has no rational explanation. Not everything has a rational explanation, Maxwell. Everything has an explanation, he countered. Whether we've discovered it yet is another matter. A young woman approached their table hesitantly. Excuse me? She said to Maxwell. But aren't you Maxwell Reed? The Reed Technologies guy? Before he could respond, Evelyn smoothly interjected. I think you're mistaken. This is my cousin Michael visiting from Seattle. The woman apologized and returned to her table, but the damage was done. Several patrons glanced in their direction, whispers spreading like ripples in still water. Thank you, Maxwell said quietly. Your anonymity matters to you, Evelyn observed. Interesting for someone so public. I separate my professional identity from my personal life. Do you? She asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Or have they become so entangled you can no longer distinguish between them? Before Maxwell could answer, she rose from the table. I should get back to work. The chess set in the corner is available if you'd like to stay a while. The white bishop is missing, but we use a bottle cap as a substitute. As she walked away, Maxwell found himself calling after her. Will you be here tomorrow? Evelyn paused. I'm here every day, Maxwell. The question is, will you come back again? With that, she returned to her position behind the counter, leaving Maxwell with a cooling cortado and the strange sensation that he'd just been outmaneuvered by a woman who couldn't see the board. For the next week, Maxwell returned to Luminous. Grounds each morning, arriving after the rush and lingering longer each day. He'd bring his tablet, ostensibly working, but his attention remained fixed on Evelyn's movements behind the counter. He observed her interactions with customers, the gentle touches, the knowing smiles, the uncanny ability to provide exactly what people needed before they asked. On the 8th day, Maxwell arrived to find the cafe unexpectedly empty, except for Evelyn, who sat at a table near the window, fingers tracing a weathered photograph. We're closed for maintenance, she explained. As he entered. Water heater issues. Gabriel's handling the repair. I should go then, Maxwell said, turning to leave. Stay, she invited. I've made coffee already, and I think it's time we talked properly. Maxwell settled across from her, noticing the photograph. Beneath her fingertips, a smiling young girl with bright eyes standing beside a piano. Is that you? He asked. Before, she confirmed. I was 12 when the condition manifested. Rare form of optic neuropathy. Progressive and irreversible. I'm sorry. Evelyn shrugged. It was devastating then. Now it's simply part of who I am. And your ability? Maxwell asked carefully. She withdrew her hands from the photograph, folding them in her lap. That came after. The doctors called it neurological rewiring, my brain compensating for the lost sense by enhancing others. But that doesn't explain everything. What do you mean? The medical explanation covers the heightened hearing, the sensitive touch, the spatial awareness, she explained. But not the way I sense people, their emotions, their needs, sometimes even their memories. When did you first notice it? In the hospital. A nurse took my hand, and suddenly I felt her exhaustion, her worry about her son's college applications, her foot pain from working double shifts. Evelyn smiled at the memory. I told her to sit down and elevate her left foot. She thought I was psychic. Are you? Maxwell asked, only half joking. No, it's more like emotional synesthesia. Where others see colors or hear sounds, I feel people's inner states through touch. Maxwell leaned forward. And what happened when you touched me? Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Something unique. Most people are open books, their emotions, or close to the surface. You're different. Years of suppression, of building walls. When we touched, it was like a dam breaking. What did you feel? Everything you've locked away. Loneliness, brilliance, disillusionment, yearning for something you can't name. Her voice softened. And a boy who once felt everything too deeply, before he taught himself not to feel at all. Maxwell's throat tightened. That's remarkably presumptuous, based on a momentary touch. Is it wrong? She challenged gently. He didn't answer. I spent years being studied by researchers, Evelyn continued after a moment. Johns Hopkins, Stanford, MIT. Brain scans, controlled experiments, endless questions. They published papers about the empathic blind subject. Then came the people who wanted to use my ability. Corporations, government agencies, even a televangelist once. She smiled without humor. I became a curiosity, then a tool, never a person. So you retreated and opened a cafe, Maxwell observed. I built a life where I could use my gift on my terms. Here, I help people in small ways. The right drink on a difficult day. A moment of connection. Nothing world-changing, but meaningful. Could you demonstrate? Maxwell asked suddenly. With someone else, I mean. Evelyn tilted her head, considering. That feels like a test. Call it verification of an extraordinary claim. The door chimed as Gabriel entered, shaking rain from his coat. Plumber's on his way, he announced. Gabriel, Evelyn called. Would you mind helping us with something? The young man approached curiously. Maxwell would like a demonstration, she explained. May I? Gabriel nodded, extending his hand without hesitation, clearly a familiar request. Evelyn took his hand. Between both of hers, closed her eyes and breathed deeply. After a moment she spoke. You're worried about your mother's biopsy results tomorrow. The waiting is worse than knowing would be. You haven't told anyone at the recording studio because you don't want their pity. Gabriel's eyes widened. How did she couldn't have known that, he said to Maxwell. I haven't mentioned it to anyone here. Maxwell studied them both, searching for signs of collusion, finding none. Remarkable, he admitted finally. But there must be a scientific explanation. Perhaps, Evelyn agreed, releasing Gabriel's hand. But does knowing the mechanism change what it is? I need everything on an Evelyn Taylor, Maxwell said into his secure phone line. Blind cafe owner in Greenwich Village. Focus on medical history. Research studies she participated in, particularly at Johns Hopkins, Stanford and MIT. Parameters? His head of security asked, unfazed by the unusual request. Complete digital footprint, academic papers mentioning her condition, property records, business filings, and locate any research on tactile empathy or emotional synesthesia in the visually impaired. Timeline? Yesterday, Maxwell replied, ending the call. Back in his penthouse office, Maxwell created a secure folder labeled Sensory Anomalies Research. Scientific curiosity, he told himself. Nothing more. The woman had demonstrated an unexplained ability that defied conventional understanding. Any rational person would investigate. He ignored the voice suggesting his fascination went beyond academic interest. By evening, the first files arrived, securely transmitted to his private server. Maxwell poured a rare glass of scotch and began reviewing the findings. Evelyn Marie Taylor, 32. Lost her sight at age 12 to Leber hereditary optic neuropathy, an uncommon genetic condition. Bachelor's degree in music therapy from Juilliard, completed with honors despite her disability. Small inheritance from grandparents used to purchase the building housing Luminous Grounds 6 years ago. More interesting were the medical journal references. An article in Neuroscience Quarterly mentioned a subject, E.T., who demonstrated extraordinary extrasensory capabilities following visual impairment. Another paper in cognitive processing described experiments where a blind subject could accurately identify emotional states through minimal physical contact. Most revealing was a video file, footage from a research study conducted at MIT's Cognitive Science Department 9 years earlier. The grainy recording showed a younger Evelyn in a clinical setting, touching the hands of various participants and describing their emotional states with startling accuracy. The researchers' excitement was palpable until, midway through the session, Evelyn abruptly removed her electrode cap and declared the study over. Maxwell watched this moment repeatedly. What had caused her sudden withdrawal? His phone buzzed with a message from his chief innovation officer. "Need your sign-off on the neural interface acquisition. Board is getting nervous about the premium we're paying." Maxwell dismissed the notification. The multi-billion-dollar deal that had consumed him 2 weeks ago now seemed distant, almost trivial, compared to the mystery before him. A search for news articles yielded several human interest stories. Blind woman's remarkable gift brings comfort. To grieving family, the touching healer, NYC cafe owner's uncanny empathy, and most intriguingly, miracle worker or elaborate hoax. Scientists divided on blind woman's claims. This last piece detailed controversy surrounding Evelyn's abilities, including skepticism from prominent neurologists and accusations of fraud from a former research assistant. Shortly after its publication, Evelyn had withdrawn from public studies completely. "Sir?" Claire's voice came through the intercom at 9:17 p.m. "The Tokyo investors are on the line. They're threatening to pull out if you don't personally address their concerns." "Tell them I'll call tomorrow," Maxwell replied, not looking up. "From the research files. Mr. Reed, with all due respect, that's what you said yesterday." Maxwell finally tore his gaze from the screen. "Handle it, Claire. That's why I pay you exceptionally well." A notification appeared from his competitive intelligence team. "Unusual activity detected. Kestrel Technologies conducting background research on small business in Greenwich Village. Possible acquisition target?" Maxwell frowned. Victor Kestrel, his chief rival in the tech space, had an uncanny ability to shadow Maxwell's interests. If he was investigating luminous grounds, the thought of Victor approaching Evelyn with his trademark predatory acquisition strategy triggered an unexpected protective instinct. Maxwell closed the files and made 2 calls, one to his legal team to quietly purchase the buildings adjacent to Evelyn's cafe, and another to enhance security monitoring of the area. Just precautionary measures, he reasoned. Protecting a research subject of interest, nothing personal about it. Yet as Maxwell finally prepared for bed at 2:38 a.m., he found himself wondering how Evelyn would perceive his clandestine investigation when she discovered it. The thought troubled him more than it should have. For the first time in his adult life, Maxwell Reed was concerned about someone else's feelings, and he had no algorithm to process this unfamiliar emotion. The sign on Luminous Ground's door read, "Closed," but light spilled onto the evening sidewalk. Maxwell checked his watch, 8:43 p.m., and rapped his knuckles against the glass. After a moment, Gabriel appeared, surprise evident as he unlocked the door. "Mr. Reed, we're closed for the day." "I need to speak with Evelyn," Maxwell said, stepping inside without invitation. "Is she here?" Gabriel hesitated. "She's in the back office. I'll see if—" "It's all right, Gabriel," Evelyn's voice called. "Let him in. You can head home." The young barista glanced between them uncertainly before gathering his belongings. "Call if you need anything," he told Evelyn pointedly as he left. Maxwell found Evelyn in the small office, fingers moving across spreadsheets with raised numeric notations. A half-empty teacup sat beside her, fragrant steam still rising. "I expected you earlier," she said, closing the ledger. "Your usual pattern has been morning visits." Maxwell set his leather portfolio on her desk. "I've been researching." "Me," she stated simply. Not a question. He didn't deny it. "Your condition is extraordinary. The scientific implications alone—" "Stop." Her voice remained gentle, but carried unmistakable firmness. "I'm not a condition or a research subject. I'm a person sitting across from you." Maxwell paused, recalibrating. "You're right. I apologize. She nodded, accepting this. Why are you here, Maxwell? He opened the portfolio and removed a document, placing it before her, a reflexive action he immediately recognized as absurd. I have a proposal. I can't read printed contracts, she reminded him, amusement in her voice. Of course, I'll summarize. Maxwell cleared his throat. Reed Technologies would fund comprehensive research into your neurological condition, your gift with the world's leading experts. State-of-the-art facilities, complete medical support and significant compensation. And in return, access, controlled studies to document and understand your abilities, development of potential applications. Applications, she repeated, her expression cooling, such as. The possibilities are extraordinary. Enthusiasm crept into his voice. Imagine technology that could replicate even a fraction of your empathic perception. The implications for healthcare, therapy, even corporate negotiations, and military interrogations, law enforcement, corporate advantage. Evelyn finished. I've heard similar proposals before. This would be different, Maxwell insisted. You'd have complete control, veto power over any application, your name on the patents. My name, she repeated softly. You still don't understand, do you? Maxwell frowned. What am I missing? Evelyn rose, moving with certainty around her desk to stand before him. May I? She asked, extending her hand. After a moment's hesitation, Maxwell placed his hand in hers. The connection wasn't as overwhelming as their first contact, but warmth spread through him, along with a distinct sense of being truly seen. You see my gift as a puzzle to solve, a technology to develop, a product to market, she said gently. You're approaching this the only way you know how, with contracts and resources and control. I'm offering you an opportunity to change the world, he countered. The world, she echoed. Or your world. She released his hand and moved toward the cafe's main room. Maxwell followed, watching as she ran her fingers along the worn countertop. I've spent years being studied, Maxwell, being poked and prodded and analyzed. The researchers were fascinated by what I could do, but none of them understood what it meant to live with this gift. What does it mean? He asked quietly. It means carrying other people's pain, their fears, their secrets. She turned toward him. It means never having the luxury of indifference. Maxwell considered this. Then help me understand. A smile touched her lips. A counter-proposal. Spend time here. Not as a customer or a researcher. Work alongside me. Learn what this gift means day to day, person to person. You want me to work in a cafe? Maxwell asked incredulously. I want you to step outside your empire and experience connection, without an agenda. She extended her hand again, this time in agreement. 1 month, then we can discuss your research proposal. Maxwell stared at her outstretched hand, recognizing the challenge it represented. Everything in his nature demanded. Control, planning, advantage. This woman offered none of those things. 1 week. He counted automatically, the negotiator in him unable to resist. 3 weeks, she replied firmly, and you start tomorrow morning at 6. Against every instinct, Maxwell Reed, the man who commanded boardrooms and bent markets, to his will, shook hands with a blind barista who had just outmaneuvered him completely. Maxwell arrived at Luminous Grounds at 5:57 a.m., dressed in what his stylist had assured him was casual attire. A cashmere sweater and designer jeans that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Evelyn was already inside, setting up for the day, the scent of fresh ground coffee beans filling the air. Right on time, she said as he entered, not bothering to turn toward the door. There's an apron hanging by the sink. The apron was forest green with the cafe's logo embroidered in gold thread, a simple circle with rays emanating outward like light. Maxwell held it awkwardly as if it might bite. Put it on, Evelyn instructed, hearing his hesitation. It's not optional. Feeling strangely vulnerable, Maxwell slipped the apron over his head and tied it behind his back. The unfamiliar weight of it against his chest felt like a costume for a role he hadn't auditioned for. "First lesson," Evelyn said, approaching with a portafilter in hand. "The espresso machine, the heart of any good cafe." What followed was a humbling education. Maxwell, who commanded a tech empire valued at billions, found himself struggling with basic tasks. The espresso grind was too coarse, then too fine. His milk frothing produced something closer to a science experiment than a silky microfoam. When attempting latte art, he created what charitably might be called an abstract. "Blob? How is this so difficult?" he muttered after his fourth failed attempt. "I've negotiated multi-billion-dollar deals with less effort." "Different skills," Evelyn replied, her hands guiding his on the pitcher. "You've spent years developing corporate muscles. These are new ones." At 6:30, Gabriel arrived, stopping short at the sight of Maxwell Reed in an apron. Good morning." "Gabriel, Maxwell will be working with us for a few weeks," Evelyn explained. "He's learning the business from the ground up." Gabriel's eyebrows nearly reached his hairline, but he simply nodded. "Cool. Need help with that steam wand before you burn yourself." By 7, the morning rush began. Maxwell was stationed at the register, theoretically the simplest position, but the complexity of custom orders quickly overwhelmed him. "Wait, what's the difference between a flat white and a latte again? Half-calf oat milk mocha? Is that even possible? You want me to steam the milk to exactly 140 degrees? A line formed as Maxwell's pace crawled. Several customers recognized him, phones appearing to capture the surreal sight of Maxwell Reed struggling with a point-of-sale system designed for high schoolers. "Isn't that the guy from Reed Technologies? What's he doing here? Some kind of undercover boss thing." By 9:30, Maxwell's perfect haircut had wilted, his designer sweater bore coffee stains, and his patience had evaporated. A harried-looking businessman approached the counter, already barking into his phone. "Large Americano, 2 extra shots," he demanded without looking up, extending his credit card. "And make it quick, I'm late." "I'm sorry, but there are customers ahead of you," Maxwell replied, gesturing to the line. The man finally glanced up, irritation plain. "Do you know who I am?" The irony of the situation, Maxwell typically being the one asking that question, wasn't lost on him. "No," he replied evenly. "And at luminous grounds, it doesn't matter. The line starts back there." The man blinked, surprised by the response. He opened his mouth to argue, then noticed Evelyn approaching from behind the counter. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her calm presence immediately shifting the energy. "Your new employee needs training in customer service," the man snapped. "Actually," Evelyn replied with a smile, "he's absolutely right about our policy. Everyone waits their turn. But since you're having a difficult morning, your voice suggests significant stress. May I recommend our lavender honey latte instead? The herbal's notes might help with that tension headache I suspect you're fighting." The man stared at her, then at Maxwell, then back to her. "How did you know about my headache?" "Lucky guess," she said. "Now will you join the line, or would you prefer to try another cafe?" To Maxwell's astonishment, the man quietly moved to the end of the line. "That was remarkable," Maxwell murmured when Evelyn returned to his side. "Not really," she replied. "People respond to being truly seen, even difficult ones." She tilted, her head listening to the bustling cafe. "Speaking of which, your phone has vibrated 17 times in the past hour. Someone important trying to reach you." Maxwell had been so absorbed in his struggles that he'd forgotten the outside world. Checking his phone, he found increasingly urgent messages from his executive team about a security breach at their Seattle data center. "I need to take this," he said, already moving toward the back room. "Of course," Evelyn nodded. "The world doesn't stop because you're learning to steam milk." "I didn't agree to this," Maxwell protested as Evelyn's rideshare pulled up outside the Manhattan Center for Visual Rehabilitation. "You agreed to understand my world," Evelyn replied, gathering her tote bag. "This is part of it. Every Wednesday afternoon, after a week at the cafe, Maxwell had developed a grudging competence with basic barista skills. His milk steaming had improved, though latte art remained beyond his capabilities. What surprised him most was how quickly the cafe's regulars had accepted his presence, their initial curiosity giving way to routine interaction. Today, however, Evelyn had informed him they would be closing early for her weekly volunteer session. With visually impaired children. "I don't do well with kids," Maxwell admitted as they entered the building. "You don't do well with vulnerability," Evelyn corrected. "Children are just more honest about it than adults." The center's music room held a circle of chairs, an upright piano, and an assortment of percussion instruments. Most notable was a colorful toy piano designed for small hands with textured keys and braille markings. "Evelyn's here," announced a girl of about 8, her face turning toward the door, though her eyes stared vacantly. She wore heart-shaped sunglasses and clutched a worn stuffed rabbit. "Hello, Lily," Evelyn greeted warmly. "Yes, it's me, and I've brought a friend today. His name is Maxwell." 5 children, ranging from about 6 to 12 years old, turned toward them with varying degrees of visual impairment, evident in their expressions. None wore the guarded masks that Maxwell encountered in boardrooms. Their curiosity was naked, unfiltered. "Are you blind too?" asked a boy with thick glasses and a Yankees cap. "No," Maxwell answered stiffly. "Then why are you here?" The boy persisted. Maxwell glanced at Evelyn, who smiled encouragingly. "I'm learning from Evelyn." This seemed to satisfy the children, who quickly returned their attention to the main attraction. Evelyn sat at the piano and began their session with what was clearly a familiar routine, musical exercises designed to sharpen auditory discrimination and spatial awareness. Maxwell stood awkwardly against the wall, unsure of his role. The children's ease with their disability unsettled him. They navigated their world differently, but without the self-consciousness he would have expected. "Mr. Maxwell," called Lily, the girl with heart sunglasses, "you're very tall. Your voice comes from way up high." "I suppose I am," he replied, surprised by the observation. "Can you play any instruments?" asked another child. Before Maxwell could deflect, Evelyn interjected. "That's an excellent question, Damon. Can you, Maxwell, put on the spot?" Maxwell hesitated. "I used to play piano a long time ago." "Play something," several voices demanded enthusiastically. "I haven't played in decades," he protested. But Evelyn had already risen from the piano bench, gesturing toward it with a challenging smile. "Music is like riding a bicycle. Your fingers remember." Reluctantly, Maxwell sat at the piano. He placed his hands on the keys, the cool ivory, both foreign and familiar, beneath his fingertips. Memories surfaced unbidden, endless childhood practice sessions, his father's critical voice, trophies that never earned approval. He began with simple scales, muscle memory returning with each note. Then, without conscious decision, his fingers found the opening bars of Debussy's Clair de Lune, the last piece he had mastered before abandoning music for more practical pursuits. The children fell silent as the gentle melody filled the room. Maxwell closed his eyes, surrendering to the piece. He had forgotten this feeling, this pure creation, unconnected to profit margins or market share. When he finished, the silence lingered for a moment before the children erupted in applause. "That was beautiful," Lily declared, her face alight with wonder. "It sounded like moonlight feels on your skin." Maxwell stared at the child, struck by her perfect description of Debussy's intention. "Why did you stop playing?" asked Damon. The direct question caught Maxwell off guard. "My father thought it was a waste of time. He said music doesn't build empires." "That's silly," Lily pronounced with absolute certainty. "Music builds better things than empires." She approached him then, hand outstretched until it found his arm. Her small fingers wrapped around his wrist with complete trust, sending a jolt of unexpected emotion through him. "Will you teach me that moon song?" she asked. Maxwell looked up to find Evelyn watching him, her expression gentle with understanding. "I might not be very good at teaching," he warned the child. "That's okay," Lily assured him. "I'm very good at learning." As Maxwell guided the little girl's hands to the keys, something long dormant stirred within him, a memory of who he might have been before ambition and expectation had narrowed his path to a single relentless trajectory. Maxwell was explaining the difference between single origin and blended beans to an elderly customer when his phone vibrated with a distinctive pattern, the emergency protocol only 5 people could activate. He excused himself and stepped into the back office. "What is it?" he answered tersely. "The board has called an emergency meeting." Claire's voice was taut with stress. 30 minutes. Your presence is non-negotiable." "What happened?" "Bloomberg ran a piece questioning your mental stability. They've obtained photos of you working at a cafe, quoted anonymous sources about erratic behavior. Our stock is down 12% and falling." Maxwell closed his eyes briefly. "I'll be there. Send a car." When he emerged, Evelyn was waiting, head tilted in that way that suggested she was reading the air itself. "You have to go," she stated simply. "Corporate emergency," he confirmed, untying his apron. "The world has noticed my absence and disapproves of your choice to make coffee rather than money." There was gentle amusement in her voice. "Something like that." He hesitated. "I'm not sure when I'll be back." Evelyn nodded. "Your world won't wait forever. I understand." 40 minutes later, Maxwell strode into Reed Technologies' main boardroom, once again armored in an impeccable suit and the cold confidence that had built his empire. 14 faces turned toward him, expressions ranging from concern to thinly veiled opportunism. "Thank you for joining us, Maxwell," said Warren Blackwell, the board chairman. "We have serious concerns about recent developments." A digital display showed the Bloomberg article, "Reed Technologies CEO, Brilliant Innovation or Brilliant Breakdown." Beneath the headline was a photo of Maxwell in his cafe apron, steaming milk. "Care to explain your recent activities?" Blackwell continued. "The board has received reports of missed meetings, delegated responsibilities, and now this unusual career detour." Maxwell surveyed the room. These men and women whose respect he had commanded through ruthless efficiency and unwavering focus. How could he explain Evelyn, the connection he'd felt, the cafe that somehow felt more real than the glass and steel monument he'd built? "I've been conducting personal research," he said finally, falling back on the explanation that would make sense to them. "An immersive study of human-centered service design." Murmurs circulated around the table. "Research," repeated Monica Chen, head of R&D. "Into coffee making?" "Into human connection," Maxwell corrected. "Something our products increasingly lack." The CFO cleared his throat. "While you've been researching, Victor Kestrel has been making moves. Our intelligence suggests he's preparing a hostile takeover bid. The stock decline gives him an opening." A document appeared on the screen, an internal memo that had leaked to several financial publications, detailing Maxwell's unexplained absences and questioning his leadership. "The timing of this leak is suspicious," noted the legal counsel. "It suggests coordination. The board requires assurance that you remain committed to this company," Blackwell stated firmly. "We need you back at the helm, full-time, effective immediately." Maxwell felt the weight of the decision before him. 2 weeks ago he wouldn't have hesitated. Reed Technologies was his life's work, his identity, his purpose. Now he found himself thinking of luminous grounds, of Evelyn's quiet wisdom, of Lily at the piano. "I've neglected aspects of product development," he said carefully. "Our focus on efficiency has come at the expense of emotional intelligence in our interfaces. I believe there's untapped potential in—" "Maxwell," interrupted Blackwell. "With respect, we need a CEO, not a philosopher. Are you returning to your position, or should we consider interim leadership?" The ultimatum hung in the air. Maxwell, thought of his promise to Evelyn, 3 weeks of learning her world. They were barely halfway through. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "The children are asking when you'll return for their next piano lesson." She knew exactly what he was facing, even from across the city. "I'll resume. Full duties," Maxwell said finally, "but with a condition. I require 2 hours each morning and Wednesday afternoons for the continuation of my research project." Blackwell exchanged glances with the other board members. "And this research will conclude when?" "In 9 days," Maxwell replied. "After which, you'll have my complete attention and a new direction for our next generation of products." He couldn't explain why keeping his promise to Evelyn suddenly mattered more than the unquestioned authority he'd always demanded. But as the board reluctantly accepted his terms, Maxwell realized he was fighting to preserve something far more valuable than his company. He was fighting to preserve the person he was becoming. Maxwell's dual existence continued for another week. Corporate titan by day, humble barista in the mornings. He'd grown accustomed to the rhythm of luminous grounds, even finding unexpected satisfaction in the simple act of creating something with his hands rather than his strategic mind. The cafe's regulars had accepted him as part of their community, no longer gawking at the billionaire making their lattes. His relationship with Evelyn had deepened beyond his initial scientific curiosity. Their conversations during quiet moments revealed her remarkable insight, not just from her gift, but from a lifetime of listening when others merely heard. She challenged his assumptions, questioned his values, and somehow made him laugh more. In 2 weeks than he had in the previous decade, then came the headline that shattered everything. "Billionaire," and the blind mystic Reed's secret obsession revealed. The tabloid story spread across social media within hours. Accompanying the sensationalized article were surveillance photos of Maxwell and Evelyn at the cafe, entering her apartment building, and at the children's center. More damning were leaked excerpts from Maxwell's research files on her condition, clinical, detached analyses of her abilities that reduced her to a fascinating specimen. Maxwell learned of the leak when Claire called him at 5:45 a.m. "It's everywhere," she said without preamble. "Someone accessed your private server. The tabloids have your research files on Ms. Taylor." Maxwell felt the blood drain from his face. How bad? Bad enough. The medical details, the video footage from MIT, your notes analyzing her interactions with customers. They're painting it as either a bizarre obsession or a calculated attempt to exploit her for corporate gain. By the time Maxwell reached Luminous grounds, paparazzi had already gathered outside. Inside, Evelyn sat perfectly still at her usual table, face expressionless as Gabriel read the article aloud to her. Sources close to Reed suggest he's been secretly investigating Taylor's alleged empathic abilities for potential commercial applications, Gabriel read, voice tight with anger. Internal documents reveal detailed analyses of her medical history and abilities, including surveillance of her daily activities. Gabriel looked up as Maxwell entered, his expression hardening. "You should leave." "Evelyn," Maxwell began, ignoring him. "I can explain." "Can you?" she asked quietly. "Did you investigate me without my knowledge? Study me like a lab specimen?" The hurt in her voice cut deeper than Maxwell had anticipated. "Initially, yes, before I knew you. It was scientific curiosity." "When?" she interrupted. "When did it start?" Maxwell hesitated. "After our second meeting." "And it continued?" "The initial research, yes. But it changed. I changed." Gabriel stepped between them protectively. "You had no right to dig into her medical history, her private life." "You're right," Maxwell admitted. "I approach this like every other puzzle in my life, something to analyze, understand, control. It was wrong." Evelyn stood, her composure remarkable despite the betrayal. "I trusted you, let you into my world, my community." Her voice caught, slightly. "The children's lives, The mention of the children struck Maxwell like a physical blow. "Evelyn, please, let me fix this." "Fix it?" She laughed without humor. "With what? Money? Lawyers? More control?" She shook her head. "There are photographers outside my cafe, reporters calling the center. The safe spaces I've built for myself and others are compromised because you couldn't see me as a person instead of a research subject." The cafe door chimed as more photographers pressed against the windows, cameras flashing. Gabriel moved quickly to draw the blinds. "I'll handle this," Maxwell said firmly. "I'll make it go away." "That's always your solution, isn't it?" Evelyn observed. "Make problems disappear with power and money, but some things can't be fixed that way, Maxwell." She reached for her cane, something Maxwell had rarely seen her use within the familiar space of her cafe. The symbolic distance it created between them was unmistakable. "I think you should go," she said quietly, "and I think our arrangement has reached its conclusion." "Evelyn, please," she interrupted, her composed facade finally cracking. "Just go." As Maxwell stepped outside, cameras surrounded him, questions shouted from all directions. He moved through them mechanically, neither confirming nor denying the allegations, his mind still fixed on the hurt in Evelyn's voice. In his car, a message from his security team awaited. Source of leak identified. Access originated from Kestrel Technologies' IP address. Victor had weaponized Maxwell's interest in Evelyn, just as he'd feared. But that hardly mattered now. The damage was done, not to his reputation or company, which would weather the scandal easily, but to something far more fragile that had been growing between him and the remarkable woman who had begun to change him. For the first time in his adult life, Maxwell Reed had lost something he couldn't buy back. For 3 days, Maxwell respected Evelyn's request for distance. He directed his PR team to neither confirm nor deny the tabloid stories, instead issuing bland statements about private research into human-centered design. His legal department sent cease and desist letters to publications printing the most egregious claims. But the paparazzi remained camped outside luminous grounds, forcing Evelyn to temporarily close the cafe. On the 4th day, Gabriel called him. "She wouldn't want me to contact you," he began without preamble. "But this has gone too far. There was a photographer in the alley behind her apartment this morning. Someone claiming to be from a research hospital got into the building yesterday. She can't even attend her session with the children." Maxwell tightened his grip on the phone. "Is she safe? For now, but she's essentially trapped. She doesn't deserve this." "No, she doesn't," Maxwell agreed quietly. "I have a solution, but she'll need to trust me one more time." Gabriel's silence conveyed his skepticism. "Tell her I can offer sanctuary," Maxwell continued. "Completely on her terms. No press, no research, no agenda." 4 hours later, Maxwell's private helicopter touched down at a small airfield in the Adirondacks. Evelyn sat beside him, face turned toward the window, though she couldn't see the mountains below. She had barely spoken during the flight, accepting his offer of sanctuary with pragmatic resignation rather than gratitude. "We are landing," he informed her. "My property is about 20 minutes from here by car." "How often do you come here?" she asked, her first voluntary words since they'd departed. "Rarely," Maxwell admitted. "Perhaps twice in the past 5 years." A waiting SUV transported them along winding mountain roads until they reached a secluded clearing. The cabin, though cabin hardly described the 6,000-square-foot modernist structure of glass, stone, and timber, stood against a backdrop of pine forest and granite cliffs. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Evelyn said as they stopped. Maxwell glanced at her, puzzled. "Yes, but how?" "The air," she explained, "clean and sharp. The way sound travels differently in open spaces. The smell of pine and water." She turned toward him. "I may not see beauty the way you do, but I experience it nonetheless." Inside, the great room featured soaring ceilings, a massive stone fireplace, and floor-to-ceiling windows framing the mountain view. Minimalist furniture in neutral tones completed the design magazine aesthetic. Everything was immaculate, impersonal, and untouched by daily life. "Your sanctuary feels unlived in," Evelyn observed, trailing her fingers along a pristine countertop. "It's maintained by a service," Maxwell explained. "I've dismissed them for the duration of our stay. We have complete privacy. And how long is our stay? As long as necessary for the media attention to subside. I've arranged for a statement suggesting you've left the country to visit family. My team is also addressing the source of the leak." Evelyn nodded, her face unreadable. Always the efficient problem solver, they settled into an uneasy coexistence, occupying the spacious retreat like wary roommates. Maxwell worked remotely from the study while Evelyn explored the cabin, mapping its layout with careful precision until she could navigate independently. At dinner, seated across from each other at the massive dining table, the silence, finally, became unbearable. "I owe you an explanation," Maxwell said, "about the research." "You don't owe me anything," Evelyn replied. "I understood your nature from the beginning." "What does that mean?" She set down her fork. "You approach the world as a series of puzzles to solve, assets to acquire, or obstacles to overcome. I was simply another curiosity that captured your attention." "That's not fair," Maxwell protested. "Not anymore, isn't it? You investigated me without consent, collected data, analyzed me like one of your tech acquisitions." "Initially, yes," he admitted. "But something changed." "What?" "I changed," Maxwell said quietly. "You changed me." Before Evelyn could respond, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the cabin into darkness. Emergency generators hummed, but failed to engage. "Power failure," Maxwell explained, rising from his chair. "The backup system should—" "It won't," Evelyn interrupted calmly. "I heard the transfer switch try 3 times. The generator isn't starting." Maxwell fumbled for his phone's flashlight. "I'll check the breaker panel." "And I'll find candles," Evelyn said, standing with perfect confidence. "In the dark, Maxwell, I'm the expert. For once, you'll have to trust my navigation." As she moved effortlessly through the blackness that had rendered him nearly helpless, Maxwell realized their roles had reversed. In her world of darkness, his power, wealth, and control meant nothing, and her disability was suddenly a strength he desperately needed. The power remained out through the night. Maxwell, humbled by his helplessness in the darkness, followed Evelyn's calm instructions as they located candles, matches, and emergency supplies. They built a fire in the great stone hearth, its dancing light creating a small island of warmth in the vast, darkened space. "The utility company says it's a downed line," Maxwell reported after a satellite phone call. "Crews can't reach us until morning." Evelyn sat cross-legged before the fire, face tilted toward its heat. "Does this feel like crisis or adventure to you?" The question caught him off guard. "Crisis, I suppose. I'm not accustomed to systems failing." "That's telling," she observed. "Same circumstance, different perspective. I find power outages peaceful. All the mechanical noise falls away, leaving just natural sounds." Maxwell listened, really listened to the crackling fire, the wind in the pines, the distant call of a night bird. Sounds his efficiency-optimized life had eliminated. "There must be emergency supplies in storage," he said, restless with inaction. This place was designed to be self-sufficient. In the basement storage room, their flashlights revealed shelves of supplies and several sealed boxes labeled "MR Personal" in his assistant's neat handwriting. "What are these?" Evelyn asked, fingers tracing the labels. "No idea. Claire must have moved some of my things here during the penthouse renovation." Curiosity piqued, Maxwell opened the nearest box. Inside lay artifacts from another lifetime, academic awards, science competition medals, and several leather-bound journals. "My childhood effects," he explained, "surprised they still existed. I thought these were discarded years ago." "Read something," Evelyn suggested, settling onto a storage trunk. "I'd like to know who you were before Before what? Before you became the Maxwell Reed who investigates people without their permission, she said, but without rancor. Maxwell hesitated, then opened the oldest journal, its pages covered in a child's careful handwriting. He began to read aloud. September 15th. Dad says I need to focus more on practical subjects. He took away my telescope after he found me stargazing instead of studying for the math competition. I tried to explain about the meteor shower, but he said dreams don't build futures, only results matter. Maxwell paused, uncomfortable with the vulnerability in his younger self's words. Continue, Evelyn encouraged softly. He turned several pages. Forward, December 3rd, won first place in the regional science fair. Dad said it was expected. Mum seemed proud but didn't say much when Dad was there. My project on sound wave patterns was inspired by thinking about how whales communicate across vast distances of ocean. I wonder if humans could ever develop such connection. Evelyn smiled. You were a thoughtful child. Sensitive. Impractically so, according to my father, Maxwell replied, surprised by the lingering bitterness in his voice. What happened to that boy who wondered about whale songs? She asked. Maxwell closed the journal. He learned that success required focus. Sentiment was inefficient. At what cost? The question hung between them, unanswerable and yet demanding. Response. Why music? Evelyn asked suddenly. You play beautifully, yet you abandoned it. Maxwell found another journal entry. April 10th, piano recital today. Played Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Miss Abernathy said, I have exceptional feeling in my interpretation. Dad asked why I wasn't playing something more technically impressive. He said, feelings don't win competitions. He closed the journal, a forgotten ache resurfacing. Music was too revealing, too personal. My father saw it as a distraction from practical achievement, and you became exactly what he wanted, Evelyn observed. I built something significant, Maxwell defended. My work has changed how the world communicates. Has it? Evelyn challenged gently. Or has it changed how the world avoids true connection? The question struck with unexpected force. Reed Technology's innovations had indeed made communication more efficient, more controlled, but perhaps less human in the process. What would you consider success? He asked her. Connection, she answered without hesitation. Not the kind your technology enables, but the kind that changes people. That sees them truly, like what you do with your gift. My gift is just a more direct path to what everyone should seek, understanding others beneath their surface. Maxwell set the journals aside, strangely moved by these echoes of his younger self. I've built my life around controlling variables, predicting outcomes, maximizing efficiency. The idea that real success might lie in surrender to uncertainty is destabilizing. Most meaningful things are, Evelyn replied. May I? She extended her hand toward his face. Maxwell hesitated, understanding her request. Not since their first accidental touch had he allowed such vulnerability. Slowly, he leaned forward. Her fingertips traced the contours of his face with gentle precision, across his brow, down the slope of his nose, along his jawline. Her touch was both clinical and intimate, reading him like a text written in relief. There he is, she said softly. The boy who wondered about whale songs. He's still there, beneath everything else you've built. 3 days later, Maxwell's helicopter descended toward Manhattan, the city's familiar geometry spreading below them. The media frenzy had largely subsided, distracted by fresher scandals and newer outrage. Beside him, Evelyn sat in contemplative silence, her fingers tracing patterns on the armrest. Their time in the mountains had transformed something between them. After the power had been restored, they'd spent hours in conversation, genuine dialogue unlike anything in Maxwell's experience. Evelyn had shared the full story of her gift's development, the exploitation she'd endured, her retreat from public scrutiny. Maxwell had revealed more of his childhood, his father's relentless pressure, the gradual calcification of his emotional Life? We're approaching the city, Maxwell informed her. I can see Reed Tower from here. And what will you do when you return to your glass empire? Evelyn asked. Something unexpected, he replied. Something my father would have called impractical. Maxwell's executive team awaited him in the Apex conference room, tension evident in their postures. The crisis management had been efficient in his absence, but questions lingered about his erratic behavior and unexplained retreat. The board is demanding a formal statement about your relationship with Ms. Taylor, Claire reported. And the Kestrel situation has escalated. They've acquired 7% of our shares through shell companies. Thank you all for your efforts, Maxwell said, surprising them with genuine gratitude rather than his usual crisp efficiency. I need the room. Claire, stay, please. When the others had gone, Maxwell activated the room's privacy protocols and turned to his most trusted employee. I'm about to make significant changes, he began, both personally and to the company's direction. I wanted you to hear it first. Claire, who had managed his life for 7 years, studied him with new awareness. Something's different about you. Everything is, he acknowledged. I've been building technology that optimizes efficiency at the expense of human connection. That ends today. Over the next hour, Maxwell outlined his vision. A fundamental shift in Reed Technologies' focus toward technology that enhanced rather than replaced human connection. Interfaces that responded to emotional states, accessibility features that borrowed from Evelyn's navigational techniques, a complete reimagining of what technology could do to bridge human divides rather than widen them. The board will resist, Claire warned. This pivot threatens the quarterly growth they expect. Then I'll convince them, Maxwell replied, or replace them. The following morning, he presented his new vision to the board of directors. As predicted, the reception was chilly. This sounds like a complete abandonment of our core business model, Blackwell objected. Emotional intelligence in interfaces, technology that slows users down rather than accelerating processes. The market won't support this philosophical detour. The market doesn't know what it needs yet, Maxwell countered, just as it didn't know it needed touchscreens before we provided them. And this blind woman is your inspiration? Asked another board member skeptically. The one from the tabloids? Evelyn Taylor has shown me possibilities I was too narrow-minded to see, Maxwell replied evenly. Her perspective as someone who navigates the world differently has revealed gaps in our thinking. This sounds dangerously like emotional decision-making, Blackwell said. Perhaps we should discuss a leave of absence while you— Let me be clear, Maxwell interrupted, his voice taking on the steel they recognized. I'm not asking permission. I'm informing you of the company's new direction. Those who don't share this vision are welcome to tender their resignations. The boardroom erupted in objections until Maxwell raised his hand for silence. For 15 years, I've delivered record profits and market dominance. I've earned the right to lead this company, according to my judgment. He activated the display screen, revealing concept designs for the new interface systems. This isn't abandoning our success. It's evolving it towards something more meaningful. As the presentation continued, Maxwell noticed subtle shifts in the room. The younger board members leaned forward with increasing interest. The head of product development was already taking notes, mind racing with possibilities. By meeting's end, Maxwell had secured a tentative mandate to develop prototypes of his new vision. Not universal support, but enough to proceed. Outside the boardroom, his phone displayed a message from Evelyn. The cafe reopens tomorrow. Your apron is still here if you want it. Maxwell smiled. Somehow, her simple invitation meant more than the corporate victory he'd just achieved. His world was changing in ways no algorithm could have predicted, and for once, the uncertainty felt like freedom rather than chaos. 6 months later, the Reed Tower lobby underwent its final transformation. The sterile, imposing entrance, with its towering digital displays and cold marble, had been reimagined as a welcoming space centered around the newest branch of Luminous grounds. Maxwell watched as Evelyn directed the placement of the last table, a reclaimed wood piece with subtle texture patterns along its edge. 2 inches to the left, she instructed the workers. The flow of movement needs to feel natural, not forced. The cafe occupied the heart of the lobby, surrounded by comfortable seating areas designed for conversation rather than imposing corporate imagery. The coffee bar itself featured tactile elements that made it navigable for visually impaired baristas, several of whom Evelyn had trained personally. "What do you think?" Maxwell asked as she joined him. "It feels right," she replied, her hand finding his with practiced ease. "Though I'm still not convinced your executives will embrace the concept of slowing down for coffee instead of grabbing it on the run. They're learning," he said, some more reluctantly than others. The past months had seen remarkable changes at Reed Technologies. Maxwell had established the Reed Taylor Foundation for Sensory Research and Accessibility Innovation, with Evelyn as co-director. Their first project, adaptive interfaces that responded to users' emotional states, had generated excitement in both tech and accessibility communities. More personally significant was the evolution of their relationship. After the retreat, they had carefully navigated from cautious friendship to something deeper. Maxwell spent evenings at the original Luminous grounds, sometimes making coffee, sometimes playing piano for the regulars. Evelyn occasionally joined meetings at Reed Tower, her insights reshaping product development in unexpected ways. "Miss Taylor," called Monica Chen, approaching from across the lobby, "the engineering team has questions about the sensory feedback mechanisms for the new interface." Once his most skeptical executive, Chen had become an enthusiastic advocate for the new direction after experiencing Evelyn's workshop on non-visual perception. "I'll be right there," Evelyn replied. She turned to Maxwell. "Duty calls. Don't let them rush you," he advised. "Make them slow down and truly listen." As Evelyn departed with Chen, Gabriel approached with 2 coffees. "Still can't make decent latte art," he observed, handing Maxwell a cup with an unidentifiable blob of foam on top. "I've accepted my limitations," Maxwell replied good-naturedly. Over months of working together on the new cafe, he and Gabriel had developed a grudging mutual respect. "The original location misses you," Gabriel said, "though I understand why you're needed here." The transformation of Reed Technologies hadn't come without resistance. Several board members had resigned in protest. Financial analysts questioned the strategic pivot. Victor Kestrel had attempted to leverage the uncertainty with an aggressive takeover bid. Yet the company's newest products, designed with Evelyn's philosophy of meaningful connection, had garnered unexpected enthusiasm from both industry and consumers. The stock, after an initial decline, had stabilized and begun to climb. "Mr. Reed," Claire interrupted, tablet in hand, "your 2 o'clock is waiting, and Dr. Matsui's team has sent the preliminary results from the empathic response testing." "Thank you, Claire. Tell them I'll be right up." As Maxwell prepared to return to his executive duties, he paused to observe the space. Employees mingled with visitors around the cafe, conversations flowing in a way they never had in the old, intimidating lobby. The Reed Tower had begun to feel less like a monument to corporate success and more like a genuine community. Later that evening, Maxwell and Evelyn sat in her apartment above the original Luminous grounds, the day's events settling around them like comfortable silence. "Are you having second thoughts?" she asked, perceiving his contemplative mood without needing to see his expression. "About the company's direction?" "No." He took her hand, still marveling at how natural the gesture had become. "About us, occasionally." "Explain," she requested, a slight tension entering her posture. "Not doubts," Maxwell clarified quickly. "Concerns. Your independence has always been central to your identity. Now you're increasingly associated with me, with my company. I worry that I'm absorbing you into my world, rather than truly merging our worlds. Evelyn considered this thoughtfully. A valid concern. There is an imbalance of power, your resources, your prominence. I don't want to overshadow you. You don't, she assured him, because unlike most people in your orbit, I've never been impressed by your wealth or influence. I've only ever been interested in the person beneath those things. And what if that person disappoints you? The question emerged from a vulnerability Maxwell would never have acknowledged months earlier. Then we'll address it together, Evelyn replied simply. That's what connection means, Maxwell, not perfection, presence. She leaned forward, her hands finding his face with precise tenderness. The question isn't whether I'll maintain my independence. It's whether you're truly ready to be interdependent, to need someone else. 1 year to the day after their first encounter, Maxwell stood in the original luminous grounds. After hours, the space illuminated only by strings of soft Edison bulbs. The cafe had been closed for a private event, ostensibly a celebration of the Reed-Taylor Foundation's first anniversary, though only a handful of guests mingled in quiet conversation. Lily sat at the piano, playing a simplified version of Clair de Lune that Maxwell had taught her. Her heart-shaped sunglasses had been replaced with more sophisticated frames, but her stuffed rabbit remained her constant companion. Beside her, Gabriel arranged a tray of the cafe's signature pastries, occasionally offering gentle guidance on a difficult passage. In the corner, Claire chatted with Evelyn's music therapy colleagues from the center, while several cafe regulars who had become friends occupied their usual tables. The intimate gathering represented the intersection of worlds that had once seemed irreconcilable. Maxwell adjusted his cuffs, not the crisp formal shirts of his corporate armor, but a relaxed button-down that Evelyn had selected by its texture. His fingers brushed against the small velvet box in his pocket, its presence both terrifying and exhilarating. "You're nervous," observed Mrs. Abernathy, the elderly regular who had never missed her morning Earl Grey. "I haven't seen the great Maxwell Reed nervous since his first day attempting latte art. Is it that obvious?" he asked. "Only to those of us who've watched you change," she replied with grandmotherly affection. "She'll say yes, you know." Before Maxwell could respond, the cafe door opened to admit Evelyn, returning from a last-minute errand with her assistant manager. She wore a simple blue dress, her chestnut hair loose around her shoulders. As always, she navigated the space with graceful confidence, pausing to greet each guest by name without hesitation. The year had brought remarkable changes. The Reed-Taylor Foundation had pioneered breakthroughs in adaptive technology, with several patents already approved for interfaces that borrowed from Evelyn's sensory navigation techniques. The neural mechanisms behind her gift had been studied, not as a curiosity to exploit, but as insight into human connection that might benefit others with sensory differences. More profound were the personal transformations. Maxwell had rediscovered music, occasionally performing at both cafe locations. He'd restructured his company to prioritize meaningful innovation over relentless growth, losing some investors but gaining passionate advocates. Most significantly, he'd learned to value connection over control, a lesson that continued to challenge his nature daily. Evelyn had expanded her influence while maintaining her essential self. The original cafe remained her sanctuary, even as she advised the foundation and consulted on Reed Technologies' accessibility initiatives. She had steadfastly refused to move into Maxwell's penthouse, preserving her apartment above luminous grounds as her personal space. Their relationship had developed with deliberate care, both aware of the power imbalances and differences in their worlds. They had established boundaries, navigated conflicts, and built something neither had imagined possible that rainy Tuesday morning a year ago. As Lily finished her recital to enthusiastic applause, Maxwell approached Evelyn at the counter. where they had first touched. "Anniversary gift," he said, placing the small box in her hands. Her fingers explored its contours before carefully opening it. Inside lay a ring unlike any traditional engagement band. Platinum with intricate textures and subtle patterns that told a story through touch rather than visual brilliance. "It's beautiful," she said, fingertips reading its detailed surface. "You can't see it," Maxwell observed with gentle humor. "I don't need to," she replied. "I can feel its intention." "And what is that intention?" he asked. Evelyn smiled. "Partnership, not possession." "Exactly." Maxwell took a breath. "I've built my life around certainty, Evelyn. Around control and predictable outcomes. Loving you has been the most uncertain, uncontrollable experience of my existence. And yet here you are," she noted, "offering to make it permanent. Not offering to make anything," he corrected. "Asking if you'll continue this journey with me. Equal partners, different strengths. Your world and mine, creating something better. Together." Around them, the gathered friends and family fell silent, aware of the moment unfolding. "Before you answer," Maxwell said, "I need you to know something. That first day when our hands touched and I couldn't move, it wasn't just your gift affecting me. It was recognition. Some part of me knew that you would change everything." Evelyn extended her hand, palm up, an invitation rather than a demand. "Show me." Without hesitation, Maxwell placed his hand in hers. This time there was no shock, no paralyzing jolt. Only the warm, steady connection of two people who had learned to truly see each other. "Yes," she said simply, as their fingers intertwined. Maxwell Reed, once the most controlled man in the corporate world, embraced the beautiful uncertainty of a future guided by something more powerful than logic, more valuable than success, and more transformative than any technology: the simple, profound touch of connection.